Hey, Jesse, thanks for coming on to 3PL Live. I'm excited to talk to you. We chatted a little bit offline. You mentioned you got your start at Convoy. For those that don't know you, would you mind just kind of giving me a little bit of background on you?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for having me on, Jeremy. Happy to be here and chat all things freight tech and all that good stuff. I got into logistics just like many other people in logistics, which is not that many people grow up thinking I want to be in freight and logistics. That hadn't crossed my mind, but
Fair.
yeah, but I was looking, at getting into some sales type jobs. Saw an opening at a company called Convoy in Seattle, and I was actually living in Brazil at that time that I was
Oh, wow.
interviewing around, and I was just kind of doing practice interviews, but this company Convoy caught my eye. The manager there really kind of motivated me there, and next thing I knew, I was on an airplane going to a live interview, and I landed the job. And next thing I knew, I was cold calling shippers and trying to get them to try out an entirely different type of freight broker. So that's where my background is, and then later I went into less of the freight side and more into the software side, but still remaining in that freight tech realm because it is an industry that fascinates me greatly, and I continue to learn something new every single day. So
Yeah.
that's me, my background in a nutshell.
Yeah, it's interesting because you guys have a parade has a lot of buzz going on, I would say right now for like finding capacity. I want to break that
Mhm.
down a little bit. Like how do you guys look at the market? Like what do you guys I mean, it seems like you guys are doing like a little bit of digital freight matching. It's basically just using an algorithm, it looks like, instead of going out to reach out by hand. Could you kind of explain like a high level what you guys are doing over there?
Sure. So we are capacity management. And so there's a matching component to it, but to boil it down to just matching, obviously it doesn't tell the whole story. So
Sure.
there are three essential things that we're doing exceptionally well, and all three of those things work together to form this complete solution that is really something new out there. And that's why there's such a buzz around Parade. The first thing is we're finding the best carriers for every single load based on many different data signals. Most brokers, when they are looking to find the right carrier for a load, there are three main mechanisms for doing that. The first is they go out to their mental Rolodex. Who do I know a guy who knows a guy? Second is most TMSs out there have some data store, some place in there that I can at least look and see, are there lane preferences recorded? Definitely like who's run this lane in the past. And if there's nothing there, out on the load board it goes. Hope something nice happens from that load board posting. So that's the first thing we're doing, is we're helping to improve greatly upon that, rely less on the mental Rolodex and data, and just the fairly limited amount of data you can look at in most TMSs. Now that's painting TMSs with a very broad brush, but that is kind of the first thing we're doing. Second is we need to then, it doesn't matter how good your matching is. If the carrier doesn't know about the load, what good is a match? So the second thing that we're doing is we're getting those matching loads out in front of the carriers, wherever the carriers like to go and find work, and doing it really quickly before they book out their trucks with anybody else. So today, carriers, they interact with email, they do phone calls, they do go out on debt, they do go out on the public load boards. And then, of course, many brokers, especially on the more technologically developed end, they have a private load board that carriers can go and look at their loads. And our whole point is we need to work with carriers how they like to be worked with. So we are going to push loads out to carriers in all of those different places.
Mhm.
That's going to maximize our success. And then the third thing is digital booking, is book now. So there's a lot of buzz around what is book now. I think in the beginning, like a few years ago, that was a totally new, crazy idea. And now there are a lot of folks out there trying it. For us, book now is really a means to an end, which is how do I go out and find and win the best truck for every single load? And that's what we're helping you do. And book now is an arrow in your quiver to go and help brokers do that. So those are the main things we're doing: matching loads to carriers, getting the loads to carriers, and winning them over digitally.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd like to talk a little bit about each one of those things and also just a little bit about the market because it seems like if you're an LTL shop, there's a massive amount of infrastructure going on. And I think that the problem with truckload freight is there's so many smaller trucking companies with like less than 5 trucks that they're completely
Yep.
fragmented. Is That's part of the problem, right? Just because it's not there's not if they were a bigger fleet, it wouldn't be as probably hard to communicate with them. And since you're dealing with so many different random people, is that kind of it? Some of the issue?
Yeah, so I personally don't know almost anything about LTL. Like I've been in truckload since I've gotten into trucking.
Right.
But I can definitely say that the fragmentation of the carrier market is something that is I mean, that was honestly one of the first things that fascinated me about trucking, and that's where the need for an intermediary is Coca-Cola's job is not to go and manage 800,000 different trucking companies that they might use. They need intermediaries there to go and manage those relationships because a lot of them are mom and pops, a lot of them are kind of medium-sized companies, regional companies, and a lot of them are the larger ones. I think that the really important thing, though, in coming back to how kind of our approach to freight and how we can go out and manage capacity, is that every carrier is a little bit different in how they work and how they find freight and how they interact with their brokers and shippers they talk to. So we need to make sure that we are communicating and working with them, going to them rather than doing a one size fits all, making them always come to us. That's how we get successful with our brokers.
How do some of these signals work for like the matching algorithm part? Like it looks at like I mean, because you're looking at email, it sounds like you're looking through emails through like natural language processing, and then you're going in
Mm-hmm.
there and you're looking at where these trucks are delivering and like, could you just kind of high level explain some of those different moving parts?
Yeah, I can definitely talk high level because
Yeah,
the all the different signals are kind of part of the parade secret sauce, right?
sure. Yeah,
So, but high level, there are a few main signals that we do for our we have a couple different types of matches, right? There are direct matches, which is your carriers who have given you some explicit signal. So we're pulling in, for example, posted trucks from DAT that match your load. We're pulling in emails that carriers send the broker that send you as a broker saying, here's where the trucks are available that I have this week, that 99% of brokers I talk to are not doing anything with those emails. So we're going to parse those using natural language processing, pull out all the good stuff. Everything else, we're not necessarily casting to the wayside because we're using it to find insights about that carrier's patterns and capacity. So yeah, posted trucks, those emails that come in. We're also connecting to over 14 different partner syndication networks. What I mean by that is typically a lot of load boards. So there's your big ones, your DAT, your truck stop. 123 load board is probably maybe number 3 in terms of volume. But then there are a bunch of other smaller, different newcomers into the truckload marketplace, such as there's Truck Smarter, which is just building this way better load board. I don't know details there, but we go out to not just the private marketplaces, but also the public marketplaces and syndicate loads out there. And then we bring in digital quotes. So we have a unified process for bringing in digital quotes and digital bookings across all those platforms, not making brokers go and build connections to each and every one of them.
interesting. So on the part where you guys actually reach out for like the carrier outreach part of the section, do you guys, it's all different, right? All the loads that are being sent out to each carrier, they're based upon, they're not like generic, just, hey, could you quote this? They're like looking at all this data to figure out which ones they're going to match, right?
Right. I mean, a carrier, just like a broker doesn't necessarily get a ton of use out of an email from a carrier with 50 trucks in it that they have to
Right.
go skim and then find like the good stuff. There's a reason why those emails aren't getting read by brokers. Same
Right.
works on the flip side. If you're sending out a list of all of your loads you're trying to cover to all of your carriers, that is not so useful to a carrier. So you're not going to get great engagement on that. So
Hmm.
we use this algorithm of over 21 different data signals to figure out the list of the best loads for every single carrier. And then we get that load out in front of that carrier and enable them to, they can call and email you, but they can also interact digitally.
So how does the system constantly looking to see when new loads are in the TMS? Is that how it works? And then it kind of does its thing on the background?
Yep. So load gets created in a TMS, and as soon as it meets certain conditions that brokers set up during implementation, we bring it in. We just start doing our work, and that could be at 3 o'clock in the morning. Carrier, that load gets created. Later, a carrier comes up as a match for one reason or another, and then we are going to immediately get that load out in front of that carrier. So when it's 3 o'clock in the morning, he's pulled over the truck stop. You mentioned the fragmentation of the carrier market. These little mom and pops that they pull over at a truck stop, they're looking for their next load. They don't want to spend all day reading through email after email from all of their brokers. They want to go out and book that thing. So when you get that right load in front of them at the right time and give them a button to go out and book it, that's where the magic starts to happen.
Yeah, it's a lot easier. I also read too, I think on your guys' blog that a lot of the time some of these guys might be like, or gals might be owner operators, and they
Mm-hmm.
might not even be looking at like the loads till like late at night. So just not a lot of stuff might happen like after hours, which this seems actually to be like really good for booking those smaller carriers. Is that part of this as well?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, freight does not sleep. So you have to get your freight out there into those carriers, right? Whenever they are working. And you take an example like real estate. If you're trying to go out and be a real estate agent and you can only work, only show houses during your business hours, but all of your customers, they can't do it during regular business hours because they're at work.
Sure.
You're going to be kneecapping your success if you're confining yourself to just those typical business hours. Freight's the same exact way.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then what's the deal with like, so you guys send the emails out? Is there any were you'd mentioned you try to get in front of these carriers. So are these loads ending up on load boards too, or are there like are only some of them ending up on load boards, or how does that part work?
Yeah, I mean, ideally, all of them go out to load boards because we want to cast a wide net, but it's totally configurable. If you have a shipper that you don't want their loads going out to anywhere public, that's an option. You can set up all sorts of filters and things like that in Parade. But yeah, with all of these load board syndication partners, that truck stop, and then a whole smattering of small up and coming networks like there's the smart hops of the world, and there's one called channel 19 that's just trying to build a better workflow for small owner operators, for example. There are all these different partners that we're putting the load out to, and that's just in order to get that load out in front of as many carriers as possible, and go gather as much capacity and capacity data as possible.
Now, how does the rating part work as well? Because like the systems basically, is it generating the obviously for the book now it has to generate the rate, but what about the regular when you're asking for quotes? Is it asking to like is it setting them a rate to like a suggested rate, or is it something that the carrier fills in themselves?
It's kind of some of both. We're not a rating tool. We're not a pricing tool. We're a capacity tool. So what we're trying to do is take in any rate information that a broker has on file. Maybe they've got a start buy or a target rate, or they've got, we can work with the DAT rate, the rate view rate, for example, for a specific load. There are a lot of different approaches we can take. And then also, if you have rates on file with a carrier, you can set up individual rates for individual carriers as well. So there are a lot of different, I guess, sources, and it's all configurable. Whenever I'm doing a demo of Parade, I always say, hey, I'm going to show you this book now rate, but just know that it's highly configurable based on the carrier, lane, shipper, all that good stuff. But then on the other side, we're sourcing lots of quotes. So you have to go and choose which carriers you enable for Book Now. And for all those carriers that aren't enabled for Book Now, we still want to get them to submit digital quotes to you. So they can click a button, put in their rate, and then the broker gets notified and sees that in Parade and says, yes, I want to call this guy, or no, that quote is off in outer space. I don't even want to spend my time talking to that person. And we're collecting data on every single quote as a different signal of capacity from that carrier, whether you use them or not for that load.
Interesting. So what about like let's just talk a little bit about this book now button because I think a lot of people are interested in this
Mm-hmm.
technology and I feel like for older people that are in the trucking industry, they're like, this is like magic. How is it possible to like book a full truckload carrier without actually talking to them? It seems like a pretty big ask, but can you break down like how it sounded like you'd mentioned that you have to select the carrier in advance. So it sounds like that kind of takes care of like the safety aspect of it potentially. because I could see a lot of people are like, well, how is it like, is this a safe carrier? Do they have any crashes, any of that kind of information? So like on a high level, how does like some of this process work?
Yeah, so two bits of hesitation I sometimes hear when I talk about digital booking. The first is I don't want to erase the human interaction aspect of things. And
Hmm.
this isn't directly related to your question, but I
It's
may as well
fair.
cover it,
Yeah.
which is, this is the human interactions are something that can never be automated. Instead of having 60, one of our customers, Concept Logistics, they did a case study for us, and they had a quote in there that I absolutely loved. They said, I'd rather have one 15-minute conversation with a carrier to learn about them rather than 61-minute conversations to say, hey, can you take this load? Hey, can you take this load? Hey, that's not a meaningful human interaction. Let's automate those and focus more on the 15-minute 15-minute conversations. So that kind of takes care of that. Let's develop the relationship with that carrier just like you would in any sales scenario. I mean, it's carrier sales, and then we can enable them to self-serve and book their own loads. The second big hesitation I hear is, hey, I'm the idea of any old carrier being able to click a button and take my load, no questions asked, at 3 o'clock in the morning is terrifying to
Hmm.
most people. So
That's
we are
fair.
going to make sure that a broker has to hand select the carrier that is enabled for Book Now, and you can say, hey, this carrier can do Book Now, but only when he's hauling potatoes from Boise to Sparks, Nevada, and only if it's for this specific shipper. Everything else he can't book now for. So you can go crazy specific or completely broad, just enable carrier for all book now. But you can go really specific to make sure that the right carrier is on the right load at the right time. Then and only then are you going to be comfortable with a book now. And then and only then it also just so happens that then only then can you're going to actually get substantial amounts of automation, because that's when we get the loads and the lanes and the rates right. That's when we start getting actual solid book now numbers.
So is there a way to figure out, do people look to see like which loads are, I guess, repetitive or if it's like the same lane over and over again? So do you kind of try to find that prime and I guess that prime lane to basically see if you could book down and kind of start small? Like if you're I guess scared of technology and you're worried about running away from you to some sort of
Mm-hmm.
degree, like if like you're a new parade customer, is that how you advise them? Just sort of start small, get like really specific, and then kind of build out from there.
That's exactly it. So you'll pilot, we have a zooming out. Most brokers have bought software at one point in time that didn't work. So
Sure.
it's always, it's a trust thing. And what we need to have is a very well built out customer onboarding and customer experience process. And I'm very happy to say that we have invested very heavily in that. And we've got really sharp people that come from brokerage. They don't just come from, they weren't at Facebook before this, and they weren't at at Netflix before this, and now they're like, oh, brokerage is interesting.
Sure.
Everybody in our customer experience team has worked at a freight company before, and most of them have actually spent time booking loads, so they know most of the pain that our brokers are feeling from a first-hand account. So those people look at the data together with the broker and say, hey, these carriers, this subset of your carriers, they run a certain amount of freight with you, and it looks like you've got a good tight relationship with them. Maybe you start with this subset of carriers, see how it goes, uh, learn the ropes on setting up smart rules for enabling carriers and disabling carriers for Book Now, and then you start expanding toward the wider subset of the carriers to enable them for Book Now. So absolutely starting small is the perfect way to go.
And then as far as what are these smart rules? They're just basically like filters for whatever carrier that you want to use. Could you explain what the smart rules are?
Yeah. So smart rule is that process where, to go back to my potato example, when I am enabling a carrier for Book Now, I create a smart rule. I click, turn them on for Book Now, and then I say, all right, what are the parameters that need to be in place for a digital booking to be able to go out to this carrier? And that's where I'll put in, yeah, it's got to be potatoes, and it's got to be for Walmart, and it's got to be, the truck has to be, yeah, all sorts of different filters we can put in there. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, it's interesting. It seems like these carriers too, like is it gonna I have a feeling like it's gonna start off probably with, carriers getting used to the system and then also like your shippers and brokers getting used to using Parade. Do you think that like more in like 5 years that a lot more freight will be booked digitally in the truckload space? It seems like it will be, but I mean it's now seems to be sort of like the initial testing phases, if you will, or the initial like I mean it's the initial stages, I would say, right? So like do you think that obviously we don't know the answer to this, but what's your thoughts like in like 10 years from now? Do you think that a lot of things will be booked digitally?
I have absolutely no doubt about it. This idea of digital booking, I think our vision really is, instead of having each rep uh, manage a list of 10 to 15 loads each day that they're responsible for covering, have each rep manage, this is kind of someday future,
Sure.
manage a panel of thousands of loads, that are being, that where the interactions are happening, the transactions are happening digitally. And then of course there is a human element, and that's why we have humans involved.
Hmm.
So I think that absolutely this is the way things are going. And maybe it's not 100% end-to-end digital bookings through Book Now. Maybe it's digital quoting and digital interactions. We already see, I wish I had the numbers off the top of my head, but there has been an explosion in digital quotes through Parade, for example, over the past 18 months or so. So, and just since I started in January 2021, where it was already gaining a lot of momentum. But I look now at some of the carrier, we sometimes run an analysis to see, hey, Mr. Broker, how many of your carriers are already using Parade today? And we can say that that number is substantially larger than it was a year ago. So this is the way things are moving, and we like to make it stupidly simple for carriers to use Parade. We want that to be how they want to book freight. So ultimately, it serves our customers, which are those truckload brokers.
Yeah, the interesting thing too is I've read your posts and I think some of your teammates' posts, and it sounds like a lot of brokers might add, I don't know, I'm just making up numbers here, but like 1,000 carriers a month and then just use them like one time. So there's all this onboarding and admin costs that goes into like finding that carrier, onboarding them, and then just never using them again, which doesn't really make any sense. But that's sort of like the status quo in the industry, it seems like. Is that what you're seeing as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you get plenty of those brokers that are already that have been thinking about doing that differently.
Right.
But I talk to a lot of people that their business is run based on, I get the load, I post it to DAT, I find a carrier, I onboard them, and that's how they do it. And there's not enough focus on developing carrier reuse. And when you reuse carriers, there are a lot of great benefits,
Hmm.
because you can get better rates from those carriers. That is obviously one big thing, but I think that one huge area is that when you have a carrier that you work with regularly and you build a relationship and you build loyalty there, you get better service from those carriers. You can go above and beyond for your shippers because you're reusing carriers that you know and trust, and you're winning them faster because you're doing digital bookings, and carriers like working with you. So when you reduce those one and done carriers and start reusing carriers around 4 or more loads per month, is when we consider that a core carrier. There's nothing magical about that number, but that's kind of a marker. We start to see really good service levels. We start to see really good rates as well, and you can go out and bid on more freight, because ultimately you as a broker have more capacity than you know about. You've got this huge database of carriers, and you think they just had that one truck one time. No, they've got repeat lanes, they've got territories that they like, they've probably got more than one truck in most cases, in many cases at least. So we want to go out and use the data in your TMS, in your interactions, to go out and extract more data and ultimately more capacity and help you go win it. So that's what we're all about. those one and done carriers. Onboarding new ones is great, but let's onboard them and make it count.
Yeah, the carriers would obviously be more happy if you're using them 4 times a month versus 1 time a month. So like you said, the relationship's going to be a little bit tighter. How do you guys again like figure out, I guess it's probably similar to what we talked about earlier, but how does Parade help this like help brokers figure out how to reuse carriers?
Yeah, so we look at signals in the capacity. So if we look only at who's run this lane in the past, or who do I remember I ran that load with that carrier before, which is that I come back to that mental Rolodex.
Sure. Mhm,
Yeah, like the tribal knowledge kind of. So
mhm.
if we expand on that and say, all right, so if I've got this carrier, if I can know every time he emails me about a truck, every time he quotes me, every time he posts a truck to DAT, every time he goes on my carrier portal and searches for something, every time he looks and every time he drops a load for me, every time he runs a load a truck, like if he's dropping off, you know that at one point in time he had an empty at that drop location. So if we can track the trends in all of those things, and then it goes several layers deeper. And again, that's getting into the secret sauce, but there's those, I just gave you 5 data points and there are 21 of them. If we look at those 21 different data points, where can we go and find where there might be more capacity from that carrier? And of course, talking to the carrier and asking where his capacity is a great way to do that too. So we're going to combine those phone calls with all the data automated collection, and those things catalyze to what we call capacity management.
And it probably is a little bit of training, I would imagine too, on the people that are talking to the carriers to make sure that they're not just like they're taking notes to figure out where, because Parade has a way of, I'm assuming, setting up which lanes they go on and to capture that information, right, in a systematic way.
Yeah, so I mean the great thing is I talk about mental Rolodex and data sources, but there's also the good old fashioned sticky note, right? So you have these brokers that they talk on the phone to a carrier, and the carrier's like, I've got a truck also in Houston, and then they write it down and then they stick it right here.
It's like my dad.
And then the wind blows and it falls off. And guess what? That truck's gone. It's gone. So if we can do that digitally and make it really easy for brokers to do that part of the process, we can start collecting trends in that data too.
I mean, it seems like a lot of the hard part too of what you guys are doing. Obviously, the algorithm's complicated, but getting this data and organizing it and standardizing it seems like it would be a bit difficult. I mean, that seems like it'd be a big task. I mean, that's part of the problem, right? Is just getting data sets that are clean and that are from many different places, but they need to be organized for you guys in order to actually make sense of that data, right?
And unified, I think is a good word for that. So
Unified.
you think about if we just take like a book it now. Okay, so there's unified data, like it all needs to fit this same format for it to be usable and actionable. But then you also look at processes also have to be unified. Like for example, if you go out and connect to DAT and you connect to truck stop and you connect to trucker path, they have a load board, and then there if you go out and connect to 123 load board and a few of these other ones, each one of those has a different process for how a digital quote flows or digital booking flows, and you have to go and map every single one of those to your TMS. That's a bit of a pain.
Mhm.
So we instead say, all right, let's have one unified process for connecting to all these load boards and collect all this data. And it's going to be all in that same format because it came through this one organized format. And now, now it's usable. So that's been a huge heavy lift is right. It's like finding how do we format it best and make it most usable.
Yeah, that's interesting. And it seems too, if like we take like other examples in real life, if people are a little bit hesitant of like how technology works, you could even think of like just regular old Uber and Lyft, right? Back in the day, you used to have like a dispatcher, and now Uber and Lyft has like their algorithm that figures out where you're at, sends a
Mm-hmm.
driver next to you, and then updates you. So it seems like that model is somewhat similar, right?
Yeah, I think so. And I'm frankly not familiar with the intricacies of either of our algorithms, ours or Uber and Lyft.
Sure.
But it's definitely, I mean, there are processes that can get automated in there that you don't necessarily need a dispatcher for every single scenario. I think that it's funny that you should mention Uber and and Lyft, because I remember I was talking to one of our co-founders, Preet Sivia, who in one of our earliest conversations, he was telling me like those things were great because they actually just introduced a ton of supply into the personal transportation market. So that drives down prices. If you just basic economics,
Mm-hmm.
lots of now anybody in their mom's Honda Civic can go and be a cab driver,
Mm-hmm.
and that really drives the unit economics. I think that, and this is, I'm just ripping off Preet what he
Sure.
talks about, with if you look at the Convoy and Uber Freights of the world, like they're doing great things on the automation side, but they didn't introduce mass amounts of new supply into the market. Those carriers were already there.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't go out and change the economics of the mass economics of the truckload market, of the brokerage market. And so that's why I think that the revolution of the digital freight looks a lot different from the revolution in taxi service.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that really excited me. And I entering into Convoy, was something where I didn't understand any of that. And now it's become like just this great learning experience, and seeing how freight tech is changing. There's a lot of people out there, a lot of interesting things happening with freight. So it's just the roadmap ahead. We don't know exactly what it looks like, and I'm glad to be riding it.
Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. Yeah, with Uber, there's definitely a lot more supply of cars coming in. That makes total sense. What about Convoy? Where are they? I mean, are they doing? It seems like they are obviously called like a digital freight broker, but what did they do differently than other brokers, would you say? Did they have like a parade type talk matching technology that they developed themselves, or and then you guys kind of help out like the other brokers that don't have that sort of money to do that?
Yeah, and I want to be careful because I don't want to say anything that is wrong.
Sure.
But I think that definitely a parade type matching technology. I can safely say that that's in the realm of, yeah, what Convoy has done and what they're doing now. It's been a few
A
years
while.
since I
Sure.
worked there, so but they have those same sort of ideas, like let's, instead of having people with their mental Rolodex and just dat match our freight, let's have computers do that and optimize the matching for all of this stuff. But they built their proprietary technology and used it themselves to be a broker, and their main stream of revenue, their only real stream of revenue, is for the
Brokering.
brokerage, and just do that better. And again, Uber, I don't know anything about.
Sure.
Um, so yeah, so that's, and the second part of like, is Parade building sort of that sort of thing and helping the rest of the market do it? Absolutely. Like, it's democratizing digital freight to all of the mid-market brokers who, they're well resourced, they're ready to grow, but they're not software companies. You can be a software company, or you could be a great freight brokerage. I think it's really difficult to do both of those really well. For just anybody to do both of those really well without tons of VC money and all that good stuff. So that's why I'm really excited about Parade, is like, all these brokers they've got all the same problems, but they're extremely good at executing on freight, at treating their customers really well, at doing their job of being a broker. So let's just sprinkle in a little bit of data optimization, a little bit of automation where it makes sense, and just help them go out and be rock stars.
Yeah, what would you say that like what are some of the pushback that you hear on some of your calls? And I want to also go the other way as well and find out like why people are coming on board. But like what are some like hesitancy that you hear? You'd mentioned like humans, like maybe like automation or something like that. Is there any other reasons that people have pushback?
Sure. Yeah. Well, as far as the automation piece goes, frankly, most people, when I'm able to talk through kind of how we're approaching that concern kind of goes away. Because you're setting up your guardrails, and yeah, there is a lot heavier focus on those relationships rather than everything being so transactional.
Mm-hmm.
I think another thing is just the idea um, of a big project. I think it's kind of something that every software provider goes up against is like, this is going to take time to implement it. Fortunately, though, we have some great partnerships with TMSs, and it's just a very simple TMS integration that we do. 3PL systems being one of those great partnerships where it's very minimal on the burden with between the broker with implementing this thing. We know what we're doing. We have great partnerships with our TMS partners. So that's another thing that we hear sometimes, that again, we're able to get past because of those deep partnerships.
Yeah, maybe they're just worried if they're going to actually get their people to actually use it as well, potentially the people
Yes,
that are
yep.
like the day-to-day people.
Yep, that's another thing, is it's adoption is another big thing. They're like, if I don't I'm worried about, changing process too much, and there's change aversion. Sometimes, just like, I don't know if my people are actually going to use this and all that good stuff. And then I just come back to our customer experience team, where we're like, we totally get it. We've all been brokers before. They kind of have this playbook of success, and then some incentives to help show people, hey, if you're using this thing, you're making more money. And that
Yeah,
helps people.
that definitely does. And it does help having a good implementation team and like a process. And what about on the flip side? Like, what are people most excited about when they're coming on board? Would it be like the book now button, or would it just be the carrier reuse, or what are some of the other ones?
Yeah, like I said, book now is a really a means to an end. And when people start thinking about, like, why do I want book now? And it's because of that carrier rep efficiency. They don't want to have people spending all day just chasing trucks and just depending on load boards. Load boards in public marketplaces absolutely have their place. It's really important that we have those out there, and that we use them. But the being too dependent on one source of capacity, it makes brokers feel uncomfortable because of that dependence on those. And they also see the numbers, like, how many new carriers are we onboarding, and we can't reuse any of these guys, and you guys are spending how much time to book freight, and you're spending how much time like onboarding all of these carriers. So it's really that carrier rep efficiency that can happen, that is gained through parade. And it's really in large part about breaking out of that traditional brokerage model of 12% gross margin on loads. And we're doing that by reusing carriers, and doing that by doing some digital bookings, which can also have a margin impact. So just better margins and being able to move more loads at those better margins. Most brokers are kind of in the hell yeah sort of category.
Definitely. I guess for the last couple of minutes, just wanted to riff with you a little bit about like load boards, for example. Do you think
Yeah.
that I don't know. My vision is like I think that they'll always be around, but it seems like maybe there's a little bit of displacement going on, maybe because it seems like it might have been like the way things were done for like the last 15 years, where you know, the model you talked about earlier, you post and you automatically go to the load board and you don't really look anywhere else. I think that
Yeah.
some people that don't evolve will kind of stay in that model, but it seems like there's a little bit of a change happening where like maybe like load boards will, I don't think they'll ever fizzle out, but it seems like there's, other stuff happening now where, like data is moving differently, or or the data is being analyzed more. So what's your thoughts on that? Just like, do you think that people are going to stop being as reliant on load boards and there's gonna be a little bit of a shift over time?
Yeah, and just ripping. I think a couple of things. I don't think that they're going to go away at all. I think there is disruption happening. I think that the major players are going to stay major players, especially if they do some level of innovation, which it looks like they very much are. So those are a couple of quick things.
Hmm.
And I'm not saying that the innovators and the disruptors are going to fail. It's really tough to get carriers and brokers to switch to a new place to interact in the public marketplace. I'm setting aside all of like the parade capacity management. I'm going to reuse my private network. I'm talking public networks.
Hmm.
I think that there is been in the last 5 to 7 years this explosion of interest in data science, and the way that we can use data to learn things. And those marketplaces are huge platforms of exchange that are privately held by these companies, that I think that that the data that they collect and use there is going to be extremely valuable to those companies' success. If you look at DAT and Truckstop, like they've got some rating tools, but they know so much about the market. So I see some innovation definitely happening there,
Hmm.
and using data, buy sell data, something like that. Maybe I could see happening. But yeah, I think that the renewed, I guess the newer focus on new ways to reuse your carriers and automate bookings is going to happen. And then also the load boards are just going to shift because there's the private network and then there's a public network. And the way that a broker interacts with both of those is changing. Both of them are changing. And I think for the better in most
Yeah,
respects.
no, it's super cool. I appreciate the time, Jesse. If people want to reach out to
Absolutely.
you to get a demo of Parade, what's the best way to contact you?
Yeah, just reach out to me, Jesse, Jesse at parade.ai. You can also visit our website, parade.ai. Happy to talk to you. So, I'm always open to conversations with brokers, curious to hear your things. If you disagree with things I said today, I want to hear about that too. So, reach out to me. Also, follow me on LinkedIn. You can just search my name, I think, on LinkedIn somewhere on there. And I try to post on there and create some content there. So any interaction is also very much welcome.
Yeah, I like your content. Keep it up. It's fun getting to learn from you and kind of seeing what you guys are up to over there. But I appreciate the time, Jesse.
Thanks, Jeremy.